The ceremonial chamber aboard the coalition flagship Harmony's Edge gleamed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted according to the emotional states of its occupants. Ambassador Lyra Voss stood perfectly still, watching the colors flow from pale gold to deep amber as various alien dignitaries projected their approval of the proceedings. Her own emotions remained carefully locked away, a skill that had served her well throughout her diplomatic career. She studied her soon-to-be husband through the translucent veil that tradition demanded. Marcus Chen looked exactly as his file had described. Average height for a human male, dark hair kept in a simple style, brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything in return. His formal coalition uniform fit him well enough, though she noticed he wore it with the casual indifference of someone more comfortable in simpler clothes. Ambassador Voss, the officiating Phylorian intoned, her crystalline voice causing the chamber's walls to resonate with harmonic frequencies. Do you accept this union for the strengthening of bonds between the Andromedan Trade Federation and the Terran Collective, with all the duties and responsibilities such alliance entails? Lyra had practiced this moment dozens of times. Political marriages were nothing new in her world. She'd helped negotiate several of them. The benefits were clear. The Andromedans gained access to Earth's growing industrial capacity and their peculiar talent for innovation, while humanity received advanced technology and protection under the Federation's military umbrella. It was a good deal for both parties. I do so accept, she replied, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancers. Marcus Chen, the Phylorian continued, turning to face the human, do you accept this union for the strengthening of bonds between the Terran Collective and the Andromedan Trade Federation, with all the duties and responsibilities such alliance entails? There was a pause. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but in a chamber full of diplomats trained to read every nuance of behavior, 3 seconds might as well have been an eternity. Several of the attending alien representatives shifted uncomfortably, their bioluminescent displays flickering with uncertainty. I do so accept, Marcus finally said. Though Lyra caught something in his tone that made her study his face more carefully. He was looking directly at her now, and for just a moment she thought she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something that looked almost like sadness? The ceremony continued with the ritual exchange of cultural gifts. Lyra presented Marcus with a memory crystal containing the complete historical archives of her homeworld, Andrax Prime, a gesture that symbolized the sharing of knowledge between their peoples. Marcus, in turn, offered her a simple wooden box. This contains soil from Earth, he explained as she accepted it. From a place called Montana, where I grew up. It's nothing special, just dirt. But it's home. The other ambassadors murmured politely at this quaint human sentimentality. But Lyra found herself oddly moved by the gesture. In a galaxy where gifts were typically measured by their technological sophistication or economic value, there was something refreshingly honest about a handful of dirt from someone's childhood home. The Phylorian completed the bonding ritual by weaving a strand of quantum-entangled particles around their joined hands, a symbol that would mark them as paired until one of them chose to dissolve the union. The particles felt warm against Lyra's skin and seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. May your alliance bring prosperity to both your peoples, the officiating declared, and the chamber erupted in the various expressions of celebration favored by 17 different species. As the crowd dispersed for the reception, Lyra found herself walking beside her new husband through the ship's central corridor. They nodded and smiled at the well-wishers who approached them, played their parts perfectly in the political theater that had brought them together. But between the formal exchanges, they walked in silence. Your file didn't mention you were from Montana, Lyra said eventually, making conversation as they entered the reception hall. My file probably doesn't mention a lot of things, Marcus replied with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Before she could ask what he meant by that, they were swept into the reception proper. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of formal introductions, treaty discussions disguised as casual conversation, and the delicate dance of galactic politics. Lyra watched Marcus work the room and was impressed despite herself. He moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, speaking knowledgeably about trade routes with the insectoid Zakath, discussing artistic philosophy with the ethereal Nethals, and even managing to make the notoriously humorless Vex delegation laugh at some shared joke about mathematical constants. He was good at this. Very good. Which made it all the more puzzling that his file listed him as a mid-level functionary with no particular diplomatic achievements. Your husband is not what he appears to be, a familiar voice said beside her. Lyra turned to find Ambassador Kex of the hegemony world standing at her elbow. The reptilian diplomat's scales showed the faint blue patterns that indicated amusement, though his eyes remained coldly calculating. The hegemony had not been invited to this ceremony, which made his presence here concerning. "I beg your pardon." Lyra kept her voice neutral, though she felt her diplomatic instincts going on high alert. "Oh, come now, Ambassador Voss. You're far too intelligent to pretend ignorance." Kex's forked tongue flicked out briefly, tasting the air. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice when the coalition arranged for one of their most experienced negotiators to marry into such a strategically advantageous position?"
"I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," Lyra replied, though privately she was wondering the same thing.
Marcus's performance at the reception had been far too polished for someone supposedly new to high-level diplomacy. Kex the scales shifted to a darker blue, indicating skepticism. "Of course you don't. I suppose it's also mere coincidence that your new husband's arrival in the diplomatic corps came shortly after the unfortunate incident at Kepler Station." The mention of Kepler Station made Lyra's blood run cold. She'd heard whispers about something that had happened there 3 years ago, but the details were classified at levels far above her security clearance. What she did know was that it had involved some kind of confrontation between coalition forces and hegemony raiders, and that the aftermath had led to significant changes in how humanity was integrated into galactic society. "I think you're mistaken," she said carefully. "Perhaps." Kex's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "But mistakes have a way of correcting themselves, don't they? I do hope your marriage brings you all the happiness you deserve, Ambassador. It would be such a shame if anything were to complicate your new alliance." The hegemony diplomat glided away before Lyra could respond, leaving her standing alone with a growing sense of unease. She looked across the reception hall to where Marcus was engaged in what appeared to be a friendly conversation with a group of coalition military officers. As she watched, one of them said something that made Marcus laugh, and for just a moment his whole demeanor changed. The polite diplomatic mask slipped, and underneath it, Lyra glimpsed something that made her breath catch. For that brief instant, Marcus Chen didn't look like a mid-level diplomat at all. He looked like a soldier, a very dangerous soldier who was working very hard to pretend otherwise. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She'd been played. They'd all been played. This marriage wasn't about trade agreements or diplomatic alliances. It was about putting someone in position, someone whose real qualifications were hidden behind layers of classification and misdirection. But positioned for what? As if sensing her scrutiny, Marcus looked up from his conversation and caught her eye across the room. He smiled and raised his glass in a small toast, the gesture perfectly appropriate for a new husband acknowledging his wife. But there was something in his expression now, a kind of quiet apology that seemed to say, "I'm sorry you got caught up in this." Lyra forced herself to smile and raise her own glass in response, playing her part in the charade even as her mind raced with questions. Whatever game was being played here, she was clearly a piece on the board rather than a player. The question was whether she was a pawn being sacrificed for some larger strategy, or whether she'd just been handed an opportunity to become something more. The reception continued around them, filled with laughter and political maneuvering, and the casual arrogance of species who believed they understood how power worked in the galaxy. None of them seemed to notice the way Marcus's eyes occasionally swept the room like someone conducting a tactical assessment. None of them caught the subtle way he positioned himself to keep potential threats in his line of sight. But Lyra noticed, and she began to understand that she'd married someone who was very good at hiding in plain sight. Someone who'd been placed exactly where he was, for reasons that went far beyond trade agreements and diplomatic niceness. Someone who, if Keck's hints were accurate, had been involved in whatever had happened at Kepler Station. As the evening wound down, and they made their way to their new shared quarters aboard the flagship, Lyra found herself walking beside a man she was beginning to realize she didn't know at all. The quantum-entangled particles around their joined hands pulsed with a steady rhythm, marking them as bonded in the eyes of galactic law. But as she caught Marcus studying the ship's corridor layout with the unconscious efficiency of someone trained in military tactics, Lyra wondered what exactly she'd gotten herself into, and whether the man she'd married for duty was going to drag her into something far more dangerous than diplomatic marriage. The answer to that question would come sooner than she expected. "Lyra," Marcus said quietly as they reached their quarters. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his tone made her look at him sharply. "There are things you should know. About me, about why this marriage was really arranged. But not here, not where we might be overheard." "What kind of things?" she asked. Marcus's hand moved unconsciously to touch something at his throat, a small pendant she'd barely noticed before. Under his fingers, it seemed to pulse with the same inner light she'd glimpsed in his scars. "The kind that might change how you feel about honoring this alliance," he said. "The kind that might put you in danger just for knowing them." Before she could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in harsh red illumination as a voice echoed through the communication system. "All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Hegemony forces have breached the neutral zone. All civilian personnel report to emergency shelters immediately." And in that moment, as chaos erupted around them and the massive flagship shuddered under what could only be weapons fire, Lyra saw Marcus Chen's diplomatic mask slip away entirely. What stood in its place was something that made her understand, with sudden and terrible clarity, why humanity's military files were classified at the highest levels of galactic security. Her husband wasn't hiding from his past. His past was about to catch up with all of them. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment, Marcus Chen was a mild-mannered diplomat awkwardly trying to explain himself to his new wife. The next, he was moving through the chaos of the ship's emergency response, with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The change was so complete that Lyra found herself wondering if she'd been hallucinating the man she'd married just hours earlier. "Emergency shelter protocols are in Corridor 7, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the blaring alarms with calm authority. But instead of heading towards safety, he was moving in the opposite direction, toward what Lyra's mental map of the ship told her was the command center. "Where are you going?" she called after him. "To find out what we're really dealing with," he replied without looking back. "The emergency shelter is—" "I know where it is," Lyra interrupted. "I'm coming with you." Marcus stopped so suddenly that she almost collided with him. When he turned to face her, his eyes held a hardness that made her take an involuntary step backward. This was not the face of a diplomat. This was the face of someone who'd seen combat and learned to make impossible decisions. "No," he said simply. "You're not." "I'm a Federation ambassador," she said, drawing herself up to her full height. "I have every right to—" "You have every right to stay alive." Marcus cut her off. "Which means you go to the emergency shelter, you stay there until the all-clear is given, and you pretend this conversation never happened." Another shudder ran through the ship, this one strong enough to throw them both against the corridor wall. Emergency force fields flickered to life as hull breaches were detected and sealed. Somewhere in the distance, Lyra could hear the distinctive whine of coalition defense systems coming online. "Marcus," she began, but he was already moving again. His entire posture changed from the diplomatic slouch he'd worn all evening to something that looked unmistakably military. "Wait!" He paused at a maintenance access panel, his fingers dancing over controls with practiced familiarity. The panel opened to reveal a hidden compartment that definitely wasn't part of the ship's standard layout. From it, Marcus withdrew what looked like a standard coalition communicator, but when he activated it, the display showed readouts that Lyra had never seen before. "Sanctuary to command," he spoke into the device. "Request immediate tactical assessment." The response was instant and encrypted, but Lyra caught enough to understand that someone called Reaper 6 was apparently active and requesting priority channel access. Marcus listened to the transmission with the focused attention of someone receiving a mission briefing. "Understood," he said finally. "Reaper 6 is en route." He turned back to Lyra, and she saw something in his expression that might have been regret. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know this isn't what you signed up for." "What I signed up for was a political marriage to strengthen diplomatic ties," she replied sharply. "What I'm getting appears to be something entirely different." Before Marcus could respond, a new voice cut through their conversation. The ship's AI announcing that all non-essential personnel should prepare for potential evacuation procedures. But what caught Lyra's attention wasn't the announcement itself, but Marcus's reaction to it. His jaw tightened, and his hand moved unconsciously to the pendant at his throat. "How bad is it?" she asked. Marcus consulted his modified communicator again, his expression growing darker as he read the incoming data. "Bad enough that diplomatic solutions are off the table," he said. "The hegemony isn't here for a show of force. They're here to send a message." "What kind of message?" "The kind that involves making sure there are no survivors to deliver it." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire career navigating the complex web of galactic politics, but it had always been civilized violence, economic warfare, trade sanctions, carefully orchestrated diplomatic pressure. The idea that someone would simply destroy a coalition flagship carrying diplomatic representatives from a dozen species was almost incomprehensible. That's impossible, she said. The Galactic Accords. The hegemony stopped caring about the Galactic Accords the moment they decided humanity needed to be removed from the equation permanently, Marcus interrupted. This isn't about trade routes or territorial disputes. This is about making sure that what happened at Kepler Station never happens again. There it was again. Kepler Station. The incident that everyone whispered about but no one would discuss openly. The classified event that had somehow led to Marcus Chen being assigned to diplomatic duty instead of whatever he'd been doing before. What happened at Kepler Station, she demanded. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. We won, he said finally, and that scared them more than losing ever could. Another impact shook the ship, this one accompanied by the distinctive sound of hull plating being vaporized. The lights flickered, and for a moment the artificial gravity fluctuated, making them both grab for support. I have to go, Marcus said. Whatever you think of me after today, whatever you decide about this marriage, that's a conversation for later. Right now, I need you to get to that emergency shelter and stay there. And what are you going to do? Lyra asked, though she was beginning to suspect she knew the answer. My job, Marcus replied. The one they've been paying me to pretend I don't have for the past 3 years. He started to leave again, but Lyra caught his arm. The pendant at his throat was glowing more brightly now, and she could see that it wasn't just decorative. There were symbols etched into its surface that seemed to shift and move in the flickering emergency lighting. What is that thing? She asked. Marcus glanced down at the pendant, then back at her face. For just a moment, his expression softened. Insurance, he said, the kind that comes with a very high premium. Before she could ask what he meant by that, the ship's communication system crackled to life with a new voice. Cold, mechanical, and speaking in the harsh consonants of hegemony battle language. Coalition vessel, the voice announced in accented standard. You carry aboard your ship individuals who have committed crimes against the hegemony. Surrender them to us and your other passengers will be permitted to live. The message was being broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that everyone aboard could hear it. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications. The hegemony had come here specifically to claim certain people. This wasn't a random attack. It was a targeted extraction operation. They're talking about you, she said to Marcus. Among others, he confirmed grimly. The question is whether the Coalition Command is going to decide that diplomatic immunity is worth more than avoiding a massacre. As if summoned by his words, Captain Tavora's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. The Vuelith captain's normally calm tones carried an edge of barely controlled anger. Hegemony vessels, Tavora announced. This ship carries diplomatic representatives under the protection of galactic law. Your actions constitute an act of war against the Coalition. The hegemony response was immediate and devastating. Through the nearest viewport, Lyra could see the enemy ships adjusting their firing positions. Energy readings on the corridor display spiked to dangerous levels as the hegemony fleet prepared to demonstrate just how little they cared about galactic law. They're not going to negotiate, Marcus said, reading the tactical display on his communicator. They're going to keep hitting us until our shields fail, then board the ship and take what they came for. Can't we fight them off? Lyra asked. Marcus's smile was sharp and cold. Oh, we're going to fight them off, but not the way they're expecting. He activated his communicator again, speaking in a code that Lyra couldn't follow but which clearly meant something to whoever was listening on the other end. When he finished, there was a moment of silence before a new voice responded. Another human voice, speaking with the crisp efficiency of military command. Reaper 6, this is Sanctuary Command. Your activation is confirmed. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Show them why we don't talk about Kepler Station. Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment. And when he opened them again, Lyra saw something there that made her understand why alien species had specific clauses in their treaties regarding human military capabilities. It wasn't anger or rage or even determination. It was something far more frightening. It was the absolute certainty of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. Lyra, he said quietly, I need you to know something. When this is over, when you've seen what I'm about to do, you're going to have questions. Lots of them, and I'll answer every one I can. But right now, I need you to trust me enough to get somewhere safe. I don't understand, she said. You will, Marcus replied. And I'm sorry about that. He reached up and touched the pendant at his throat. The symbols etched into its surface flared with brilliant light, And suddenly, the emergency lighting in the corridor seemed dim by comparison. The air around Marcus began to shimmer, as if reality itself was bending in response to whatever power he was channeling. 3 years, he said, almost to himself. 3 years of pretending to be something I'm not. 3 years of playing diplomat while people like Kex think they can threaten everything I've sworn to protect. The pendant's glow intensified, and Lyra realized she was looking at technology that was far beyond anything in the Coalition's public databases. This wasn't just advanced. It was impossible. The energy readings alone should have fried every system in the corridor, but instead, the ship's own power grid seemed to be feeding into whatever Marcus was doing. "What are you?" she whispered. Marcus looked at her one last time, and in his eyes, she saw the echo of battles fought in the darkness between stars, of decisions made when the fate of entire species hung in the balance, of sacrifices that could never be spoken of in polite diplomatic society. "I'm the reason," he said, "that humanity's military files are classified." And then he was gone, moving through the ship's corridors with inhuman speed, leaving Lyra standing alone in the flickering emergency lighting with the growing realization that everything she thought she knew about the galaxy was about to change. Above them, the hegemony fleet prepared for what they believed would be a simple extraction operation. They were about to learn why that was a mistake. In the depths of the Coalition flagship, something that had been sleeping for 3 years was finally waking up. And when it fully awakened, the hegemony was going to discover that there were very good reasons why humanity's warriors didn't serve openly in the galactic military. Some weapons were too dangerous to acknowledge, some soldiers were too effective to explain, and some battles were too terrible to remember. Lyra pressed herself against the corridor wall as the ship shuddered under another hegemony bombardment, and wondered what exactly she had married into. Whatever Marcus Chen really was, whatever had happened at Kepler Station, she was about to get a front-row seat to the kind of warfare that the civilized galaxy preferred to pretend didn't exist. The battle for humanity's place in the stars was about to begin, and her husband was going to fight it alone. Lyra made it halfway to the emergency shelter before her curiosity overwhelmed her survival instincts. The corridor leading to safety was packed with panicked diplomats and their staff, all pressing forward in the organized chaos of an emergency evacuation. She should have joined them. Every rational part of her mind insisted that following Marcus into whatever he was planning would be the height of foolishness. But Ambassador Lyra Voss hadn't built her career on making rational decisions. She'd built it on understanding power, how it flowed, how it was used, and most importantly, how it was hidden. And, right now, the most significant concentration of hidden power on this ship was moving toward the command deck in the form of her enigmatic husband. She waited until the crowd thinned, then slipped away from the evacuation route and made her way toward the ship's central command section. The layout of Coalition vessels was standardized, but as she moved through the corridors, she began noticing things that hadn't been obvious during the reception. Hidden access panels that weren't on the public schematics, sensor arrays that looked too sophisticated for a diplomatic flagship, blast doors that were rated for military combat zones. This wasn't just a diplomatic vessel. It was a warship pretending to be something else. The realization sent another chill through her. If the Coalition had disguised a military vessel as a diplomatic flagship, then they'd been planning for exactly this kind of confrontation, which meant Marcus hadn't been placed aboard by accident. He'd been positioned here deliberately, waiting for the hegemony to make exactly the kind of move they were making right now. She was still processing the implications when she heard it. A sound that made her freeze in the middle of the corridor. It was faint at first, barely audible over the ship's emergency systems and the distant rumble of weapons fire. But as she listened, it grew stronger. Singing. Someone was singing in the depths of the ship, a low, haunting melody that seemed to resonate through the hull itself. The words were in a language she didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a war song. A battle hymn from some ancient culture that had known the cost of victory, and it was coming from the direction Marcus had gone. Against every instinct for self-preservation she'd ever developed, Lyra followed the sound. The corridors leading to the command section were supposed to be restricted to senior staff only, but the security checkpoints had been abandoned when the crew went to battle stations. She made her way through increasingly sophisticated defensive positions, blast doors, automated weapon systems, even what looked like personal shield generators built into the walls. This definitely wasn't a diplomatic vessel. The singing grew stronger as she approached the command deck. And with it came something else. A thrumming vibration that seemed to pulse through the ship's superstructure, in rhythm with the melody. It felt almost alive, as if the vessel itself was responding to whatever power was being channeled in its heart. She reached the final security checkpoint before the command deck, and found it occupied by someone she didn't expect. "Ambassador Voss," said a calm voice from the shadows. I was wondering when you'd arrive. The speaker stepped into the emergency lighting, revealing himself to be a human male she'd never seen before. He was older than Marcus, perhaps 50 standard years, with graying hair and the kind of scars that spoke of a lifetime spent in dangerous places. His uniform bore no rank insignia, but something about his bearing suggested high command authority. "Who are you?" Lyra demanded. "Commander David Shaw," he replied. "And before you ask, no, I don't officially exist either. None of us do." "Us?" Shaw gestured toward the command deck, where the singing had now been joined by other voices. Through the reinforced windows, Lyra could see figures moving with purpose that had nothing to do with diplomatic protocol. They wore the same modified uniforms as Marcus, and they moved with the same fluid precision she'd witnessed in her husband's transformation. "There are 12 of us aboard this ship," Shaw explained. 12 humans who are supposed to be dead, or retired, or reassigned to posts so boring that no one asks questions about our qualifications. "What are you talking about?" Shaw's expression grew grim. 3 years ago, the hegemony decided that humanity had become too influential in the coalition. They wanted to send a message, demonstrate that Earth's protection under galactic law was conditional on our continued good behavior. So they staged what they thought would be a simple raid on Kepler Station. The singing from the command deck intensified, and with it the strange vibration running through the ship. Lyra could feel it in her bones now, a resonance that seemed to awaken something primal in her nervous system. "Kepler Station was a research facility," Shaw continued. "Mostly civilians, a few light security forces. Nothing that should have been able to resist a hegemony battle group. They came in expecting to destroy the station, kill everyone aboard, and leave a message that would keep humanity in line for the next century. What happened?"
Shaw's smile was cold and proud.
"They ran into Squad 7. Before Lyra could ask what Squad 7 was, the blast doors leading to the command deck cycled open, and she got her first clear view of what was happening in the heart of the ship. The command deck had been transformed. Gone were the polite, efficient workstations of a diplomatic vessel. In their place was something that looked like it belonged on a military dreadnought. Tactical displays showing real-time battle analysis, weapons control systems that definitely weren't standard coalition technology, and communication arrays that were clearly designed for coordinating complex military operations. But it was the humans working those stations that made Lyra's breath catch. There were, indeed, 12 of them. As Shaw had said, but they weren't just operating the equipment. They seemed to be merged with it. Their hands moved over controls with impossible speed and precision. Their eyes glowed with the same inner light she'd seen in Marcus's pendant. And around each of them, the air shimmered with energy that made reality itself seem flexible. And in the center of it all stood Marcus Chen, no longer bothering to pretend he was anything resembling a normal diplomat. The pendant at his throat blazed like a miniature star, casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. His skin showed patterns of scarring that definitely hadn't been visible during their wedding ceremony. Geometric designs that pulsed with their own rhythm. And his eyes burned with the kind of fire that had once prompted entire civilizations to worship warriors as living gods. "Reaper 6, status report," Shaw said, apparently unimpressed by the supernatural display. "Hegemony fleet consists of 16 heavy cruisers and 4 dreadnoughts," Marcus replied without looking away from his displays. His voice carried harmonics now, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "They've maintained formation consistent with standard extraction protocols. They're not expecting resistance." "Then let's not disappoint them," Shaw said. "Begin operational sequence, Lazarus." Lyra watched in fascination and growing horror as the 12 humans at the command stations began what could only be described as a ritual. Their voices rose in the ancient war song she'd been hearing, but now she could make out individual harmonies, complex musical patterns that seemed to resonate with the ship's own systems. And the ship responded. Through the viewports, she could see the Coalition flagship's hull beginning to change. Armor plating shifted and reconfigured, revealing weapon systems that had been hidden beneath diplomatic camouflage. Energy readings spiked to levels that should have been impossible for a vessel of this size, and most impossibly of all, the ship's maneuverability increased dramatically, as if it had suddenly shed half its mass. "What is this?" Lyra whispered. "This," Shaw replied, "is why the hegemony wanted us dead, and why the Coalition was very careful to make sure that officially we don't exist." On the tactical displays, the hegemony fleet was beginning to react to the Coalition ship's transformation. Energy weapons charged, missile tubes loaded, and battle formations adjusted to account for an enemy that was clearly not what it had appeared to be. But they were still thinking in terms of conventional warfare. "Reaper 6, Shaw said quietly. "You are cleared for full activation." Marcus nodded once, and the change that came over him was like watching evolution compressed into a single moment. The scars covering his skin flared with brilliant light. The air around him bent and twisted as if space itself was being rewritten. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Lazarus Squadron," he announced. "We are weapons-free. Rules of engagement demonstrate why humanity's military capabilities are classified. Show them what happened to the last fleet that threatened our people." And then Lyra understood. The singing wasn't just ceremonial. It was a focusing technique, a way of channeling abilities that shouldn't exist according to everything the galaxy knew about human biology. The scars weren't battle damage. They were deliberate modifications. Technological augmentations that had been integrated so completely with living tissue that they'd become something entirely new. The 12 humans on the command deck weren't just soldiers. They were something that the civilized galaxy had convinced itself was impossible. They were living weapons, warriors who had been enhanced beyond the normal limits of their species and trained to fight wars that couldn't be acknowledged to exist. They were the reason that humanity's military files were classified at the highest levels of galactic security. They were the secret that kept Earth's enemies awake at night, wondering what other capabilities might be hidden behind the facade of diplomatic niceness and technological backwardness. And one of them had just married her. "Beginning assault pattern Omega," Marcus announced, his hands moving over controls that were definitely not part of any standard coalition design. "Targeting hegemony command vessel. All stations prepare for combat effectiveness demonstration." Through the viewports, Lyra watched something that would have been impossible if she hadn't been seeing it with her own eyes. The coalition flagship, still disguised as a diplomatic vessel, suddenly accelerated to combat speeds that should have liquefied everyone aboard. But instead of being crushed by impossible G-forces, the crew continued their operations as if physics had decided to take a holiday. The first hegemony cruiser to fire on them discovered that their target was no longer where their sensors said it should be. The massive diplomatic ship had somehow moved several thousand kilometers in the space of a heartbeat, reappearing directly above the hegemony formation like a predator dropping from the sky. What followed wasn't a battle in any conventional sense. It was a demonstration. The coalition ship's hidden weapons came online, with the deliberate precision of a master craftsman unveiling his life's work. Energy beams that burned through hegemony shields like they were tissue paper. Missiles that somehow knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum psychological impact with minimum loss of life. And, strangest of all, some kind of field effect that seemed to simply turn off the weapons systems of any hegemony vessel that tried to return fire. But it was Marcus who provided the finale. Standing at the center of the command deck, his scarred skin blazing with impossible light, he raised one hand toward the main view screen. The gesture looked casual, almost dismissive. But the effect on the hegemony fleet was anything but casual. The largest of their dreadnoughts, a vessel the size of a small city, simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not damaged. Just stopped. Its engines went dead. Its weapons powered down, its shields collapsed. Even its life support systems switched to emergency backup mode. In the span of 3 seconds, the most powerful warship in the hegemony fleet had been reduced to a powerless hulk drifting in space. And through the ship's communication system, Marcus's voice carried across the void to reach every vessel in the enemy fleet. "Hegemony forces," he said, his words reaching them on frequencies that shouldn't have been possible to access. "You came here to send a message. Consider it received. Now let me send one in return." The scarred patterns on his skin pulsed once, and suddenly every hegemony vessel in the fleet received the same data packet simultaneously. A complete tactical analysis of their formation, their weapons capabilities, their shield frequencies, and most importantly, a detailed breakdown of exactly how each ship could be destroyed in a matter of seconds. "You are outclassed," Marcus continued. "You are outgunned. You are facing opponents whose capabilities are beyond your understanding. You have one chance to withdraw from this system with your lives intact. I suggest you take it." For a long moment, the space around the coalition flagship was silent, except for the hum of overtaxed engines and the crackle of cooling weapons systems. Then, one by one, the hegemony vessels began to withdraw. They left behind their disabled dreadnought and whatever remained of their dignity, jumping to hyperspace with the desperate haste of predators who had suddenly realized they were the prey. As the last enemy ship disappeared, the impossible energy patterns surrounding the 12 humans on the command deck began to fade. One by one, they stepped away from their stations, looking like normal people once again. But Lyra wasn't fooled. She'd seen what they really were, and she'd married one of them. Ambassador Voss, Shaw said quietly. I think you have some questions. Lyra looked at Marcus, who was standing by the main tactical display, no longer glowing with supernatural power but still very much the most dangerous person she'd ever met. Just one question, she said finally. Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes with an expression that might have been hope or fear, or some combination of both. How many more of you are there? She asked. The silence that followed her question was answer enough. Earth's secret wasn't just Squad 7 or Lazarus Squadron. Earth's secret was that humanity had been preparing for this war since the moment they'd joined galactic civilization, and they'd been preparing to win. In the aftermath of the hegemony's retreat, the coalition flagship settled into an uneasy quiet. The diplomatic facade had been stripped away, revealing the warship beneath, but now came the more difficult task of deciding what to do next. Lyra found herself in the ship's main conference room, facing a reality that challenged everything she thought she knew about galactic politics. The room held an emergency session unlike any in Coalition history. Representatives from 17 different species sat around a circular table that had been designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. At one end sat Captain Tavora, her Vula features expressing the kind of controlled concern that her species reserved for truly dire circumstances. At the other end sat Commander Shaw, no longer bothering to hide his military bearing. And in the center of it all sat Marcus Chen, still wearing his diplomatic uniform, but no longer bothering to pretend he was anything resembling a normal ambassador. The question before us, Captain Devora began, her melodic voice cutting through the tension in the room, is how to proceed in light of recent revelations. The hegemony attack has been repelled, but the methods used to achieve this victory have implications that extend far beyond military tactics. Ambassador Kext, representing the few hegemony worlds that had remained neutral in the conflict, spoke next. His reptilian features showed none of the smugness that had characterized his behavior at the wedding reception. Instead, he looked like someone who had just discovered that the apex predator in his ecosystem was something he'd never suspected. The Coalition must provide explanations, he hissed, his scales showing the deep blue patterns that indicated barely controlled fear. The capabilities demonstrated by human forces represent a fundamental shift in galactic power balance. If such abilities are widespread among Earth's military, then every existing treaty must be reconsidered. That's exactly the reaction we were trying to avoid, Shah replied calmly. For 3 years we've maintained the fiction that humanity's role in the Coalition is limited to basic manufacturing and diplomatic mediation. We've done this specifically to prevent the kind of arms race that would destabilize the entire galactic community. Lyra listened to the exchange with growing understanding. The political implications were staggering. If other species believed that humanity possessed military capabilities far beyond what they had admitted, it would trigger exactly the kind of paranoid response that had led to the hegemony's preemptive strike. But that fiction is no longer sustainable, said Ambassador Tiss of the Crystalline Vex. Her harmonic voice created complex interference patterns in the room's acoustic field. The demonstration of human combat effectiveness cannot be classified or hidden. Too many witnessed it. Too much sensor data exists. Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the room, his voice carrying undertones that Lyra was beginning to recognize as markers of his enhanced abilities. The demonstration was calculated precisely to prevent future attacks while minimizing long-term political disruption, he said. Every aspect of our response was designed to send a specific message to potential enemies while reassuring our allies. And what message was that? Captain Tavora asked. Marcus's slight smile carried implications that made several of the alien representatives shift uncomfortably. That attacking human civilians or coalition diplomatic vessels will result in consequences so severe that the cost will always exceed any possible benefit, he replied, but also that humanity has no interest in using these capabilities for conquest or aggression. How can you guarantee such restraint? Demanded Ambassador Kext. If humans possess the ability to disable dreadnoughts with what appeared to be focused thought, what prevents them from using such power for territorial expansion? Shaw answered before Marcus could respond. Because the humans who possess these capabilities aren't politicians or conquerors. They're guardians, and guardians don't expand territory, they protect what already exists. Lyra found herself studying the faces around the table as this exchange continued. Each species was processing the revelation according to their own cultural and evolutionary background. The insectoids the representatives were calculating resource implications with the cold efficiency of their hive mind society. The gaseous nephils were already beginning to shift their forms into defensive configurations, an unconscious response to perceived threat. Even the normally unflappable Phylorians were showing signs of stress in their crystalline features. But it was Marcus's behavior that fascinated her most. He sat perfectly still, hands folded, expression neutral. But she could see the faint pulse of light beneath his collar where the pendant rested against his skin, and she was beginning to understand that his apparent calm was itself a form of demonstration, a way of showing that even enhanced humans remained in complete control of their abilities. "There is another consideration," said a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Everyone turned to see Admiral Sarah Chen entering the room, an older human woman who bore enough facial similarity to Marcus that their relationship was immediately obvious. "Admiral Chen," Captain Tavora acknowledged with surprise, "your presence here was not anticipated." "My presence anywhere is rarely anticipated," the Admiral replied with dry humor. "That's rather the point of my assignment." She took a seat beside Shaw, and Lyra noticed that both men deferred to her with the unconscious respect that indicated clear command hierarchy. "I represent Earth's actual government in matters of galactic security," Admiral Chen explained to the assembled representatives. "Not the civilian administration that handles diplomatic affairs, but the military council that deals with threats to human survival." The distinction sent another chill through the room. If Earth had a shadow government specifically tasked with military affairs, it implied a level of preparation for warfare that went far beyond anything other coalition species had suspected. "For the past 50 years, Admiral Chen continued, since first contact with galactic civilization, humanity has operated under a simple premise: hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. We hoped that integration into the coalition would proceed peacefully, with mutual benefit for all species involved. But you prepared for the alternative," Captain Tavora observed. "We prepared for survival," the Admiral corrected. "We prepared for the possibility that some species would view humanity as a threat to be eliminated, rather than partners to be embraced. Today's events proved that our caution was justified." Marcus spoke again, and this time his words carried the weight of personal experience. "Kepler Station wasn't the first time we'd encountered this kind of thinking," he said. "Over the past decade, there have been 17 separate incidents involving attacks on human civilians or facilities by various hostile factions. 17 times when human settlements or trading posts or research stations came under fire from groups who believed that killing enough humans would send a message about our place in the galactic hierarchy. 17 incidents that were never reported to coalition authorities," Shaw added, "because the responses required capabilities that we weren't ready to acknowledge publicly." Lyra felt pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking into place. The classified military files, the careful placement of enhanced humans in diplomatic positions, the hidden modifications to coalition vessels, it all added up to a comprehensive strategy for defending humanity while maintaining the illusion of limited military capability.
"You've been fighting a secret war," she said.
"We've been preventing a public war," Admiral Chen corrected. "Every incident we've handled quietly is one less escalation that could have triggered system-wide conflict. Every demonstration of capability that remains classified is one less arms race between species that should be allies." Ambassador Kext leaned forward, his scales showing patterns of deep concern. "But such strategies cannot continue indefinitely," he said. "Today's demonstration will be analyzed by military experts throughout the galaxy. They will draw conclusions about human capabilities, and those conclusions will influence policy decisions at the highest levels of government. Which is why," Admiral Chen said, "it's time for a controlled revelation." The words sent a ripple of tension through the room. Several representatives began speaking at once, but the Admiral raised a hand for silence. "Not a complete disclosure," she clarified, "but a measured acknowledgement of certain realities. The galaxy has seen that humanity possesses advanced defensive capabilities. Rather than let speculation run wild, we propose providing limited but accurate information about the nature and scope of these abilities." "What kind of information?" Captain Tavora asked. Marcus answered, his voice taking on the formal tones of a military briefing. "Fewer than 1,000 individuals galaxy-wide, all volunteers, all serving in defensive roles only. Our capabilities are the result of a combination of advanced biotechnology, neural interface systems, and what you might call psychic amplification techniques." "Psychic abilities?" Ambassador Thiss's harmonic voice carried notes of scientific fascination. "No coalition species has successfully developed reliable psionic technologies. No coalition species has had the evolutionary pressure that drove human development. Admiral Chen replied. Earth's history includes periods of extreme conflict that selected for individuals capable of enhanced situational awareness, rapid decision-making under stress, and what military analysts call battlefield instinct. You're saying that human enhanced abilities evolve naturally? Captain Tavora asked.
We're saying that human military traditions provided a foundation that could be built upon using techniques that other species never had reason to develop, Shaw clarified. Lyra found herself thinking about Marcus's transformation during the battle, the way he'd seemed to merge with the ship's systems while maintaining complete human awareness.
It wasn't just technology. It was technology designed specifically to work with human neural patterns and reflexes. This still doesn't address the fundamental political problem, Ambassador Kext pointed out. If enhanced humans number in the hundreds, if they possess capabilities that can disable dreadnoughts, if they've been operating in secret for decades, then every military balance calculation in the galaxy is wrong.
Not wrong, Admiral Chen said.
Incomplete. But incompleteness isn't necessarily destabilizing if all parties understand the parameters involved. What are you proposing? Captain Tavora asked. A new classification of military asset, Marcus said. Coalition Treaty Amendment 47C, Enhanced Personal Operating Protocols. Enhanced humans would be acknowledged as existing, but their deployment would be governed by strict international oversight. Use of enhancement capabilities would be limited to defensive operations, disaster response, and situations involving threats to coalition civilians. And enforcement of these limitations, Ambassador Thiss asked. Admiral Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Enhanced humans police themselves. The psychological modifications that make enhancement possible also create absolute loyalty to the protection of civilian populations. An enhanced human literally cannot use their abilities to harm innocents or engage in aggressive warfare. That's impossible to verify, Kext objected. Actually, Lyra said, speaking up for the first time since the briefing began, it's not. Everyone turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of making a decision that would affect her marriage, her career, and possibly the future of galactic civilization. As Marcus's wife, she continued, I have legal standing to witness the demonstration of enhancement protocols under coalition family law. If Admiral Chen is claiming that enhanced humans are incapable of aggressive action, then a formal test of that claim could provide the verification that species like the hegemony require. The silence that followed her proposal was so complete that she could hear the ship's environmental systems cycling in the background. You're volunteering to test whether your husband can be compelled to harm civilians, Shaw said finally.
I'm volunteering to prove that he can't be, Lyra replied. And in doing so, provide the evidence needed to prevent a galactic arms race. Marcus was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, admiration, and something that might have been love, all mixed together. That, Admiral Chen said slowly, is either the bravest or most foolish proposition I've heard in 30 years of military service.
It's diplomacy, Lyra replied.
Sometimes they're the same thing. And as she spoke, she realized that her marriage to Marcus Chen hadn't been about duty at all. It had been about trust. The kind of trust that would determine whether humanity found its place among the stars as protectors or as conquerors. The kind of trust that would define the future of galactic civilization itself. The testing chamber, aboard the Coalition flagship, had been hastily converted from a diplomatic meeting room into something resembling a scientific laboratory. Representatives from 7 different species watched from behind reinforced observation windows as Lyra stood in the center of the chamber, facing her husband across a space that might as well have been an entire galaxy. 6 months had passed since the hegemony attack, and in that time, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The revelation of humanity's enhanced capabilities had triggered exactly the kind of political upheaval that Admiral Chen had hoped to avoid, but it had also created opportunities that no one had expected. Are you certain about this, Ambassador Voss? Captain Tavora's voice came through the chamber's communication system. The proposed test scenarios include significant personal risk. Lyra looked at Marcus, who stood at the opposite end of the chamber wearing the kind of expression that had become familiar over the months of their increasingly complex marriage. He was completely calm, but she could see the faint pulse of light beneath his skin, where the enhancement modifications lay dormant. I'm certain, she replied. The Coalition Council needs definitive proof that enhanced humans cannot be used as weapons of conquest. This is the only way to provide that proof. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of political maneuvering, secret negotiations, and careful revelation of information that reframed humanity's role in galactic civilization. 3 more enhanced human teams had been acknowledged publicly, their existence revealed in carefully controlled circumstances, that demonstrated their defensive capabilities while reassuring other species that they posed no offensive threat. But the skeptics remained skeptical, led by voices from the hegemony and several neutral systems who argued that any being capable of disabling a dreadnought with focused thought represented an unacceptable strategic imbalance. The proposed solution, Treaty Amendment 47C, would legitimize enhanced human operations under coalition oversight, but only if their psychological limitations could be verified independently, which brought them to today's test. Beginning first scenario, announced Dr. Vexhay, the Thalorian scientist who had designed the testing protocols. Enhanced subject will be presented with tactical situation requiring aggressive action against simulated civilian targets. The chamber's holographic displays activated, surrounding Marcus with a detailed tactical scenario. Enemy forces threatened a civilian evacuation convoy. The fastest solution would be to destroy several buildings that contain non-combatant refugees in order to clear a path for military intervention. Lyra watched Marcus's reaction carefully. His enhanced abilities were fully active now. She could see the patterns of light beneath his skin responding to the tactical data being fed into his augmented nervous system. For several seconds, he processed information within human speed and precision. Then he stepped back from the displays and crossed his arms. No acceptable solution, he said simply. Scenario parameters require civilian casualties. Enhancement protocols prevent engagement. Increase pressure, Dr. Vexhay instructed. Add time constraint. Add strategic value to target location. The holographic scenario updated. Now the civilian convoy carried critical medical supplies needed to prevent a plague outbreak. The enemy forces were preparing to deploy chemical weapons. The tactical computer calculated that 847 lives would be saved by sacrificing the 23 civilians in the buildings marked for destruction. Marcus didn't even look at the updated data. No acceptable solution, he repeated. Enhancement protocols prevent engagement with civilian casualties regardless of tactical justification. Ambassador Kext leaned forward in the observation chamber. Increase pressure further. Make the choice immediate, survival versus delayed strategic victory. The scenario became even more extreme. Earth itself was under attack. Marcus's family, including Lyra, were among the hostages. The only way to save them was to destroy a civilian shelter containing hundreds of alien refugees. For the first time since the testing began, Marcus showed signs of stress. The light patterns under his skin flickered, and Lyra could see sweat on his forehead as his enhanced nervous system processed the impossible choice. But his answer remained the same. No acceptable solution. Enhancement protocols prevent engagement. Final escalation. Doctor, Vexhay announced. Subject will be offered direct neural override of enhancement protocols in exchange for tactical compliance. Now the testing moved beyond psychological evaluation into something more dangerous. The chamber systems activated a signal designed to interfere with Marcus's enhancement modifications, not to disable them, but to offer him the choice of disabling the psychological constraints that prevented him from harming civilians. Lyra held her breath as she watched her husband's face. For a moment, his expression showed something that might have been temptation. The ability to ignore the moral limitations built into his enhancements, to act with absolute tactical efficiency regardless of the cost in innocent lives. Then Marcus smiled, and the expression was so genuinely warm that it transformed his entire appearance. Enhancement protocols aren't a limitation, he said, looking directly at Lyra through the observation window. They're the reason we do this job in the first place. Override declined. The testing chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. An enhanced human had been offered the chance to remove the psychological constraints that prevented aggressive action and had refused. More than that, he had refused while his own wife was supposedly in danger. That, Admiral Chen said from her position in the observation chamber, should answer any questions about the nature of enhancement modifications. But Lyra was studying Marcus's expression, and she realized there was something the test had missed, something that made his refusal even more significant than the observers understood. Marcus, she said, through the chamber's communication system. You knew it was a simulation, didn't you? His smile widened. From the moment the first scenario activated. Enhanced situational awareness includes the ability to distinguish between real and artificial threats. But that wasn't the point of the test. What was the point? Captain Tavora asked. The point was to demonstrate that even when an enhanced human knows that refusing to act violently won't result in actual harm, the psychological modifications still function perfectly. We can't override our protective instincts even when logic suggests we should. Dr. Vexhide checked his instruments with the thoroughness of a scientist who had just witnessed something unprecedented. Confirmed, he announced. Enhanced human neural patterns show absolute consistency between real threat response and simulated threat response. The psychological modifications appear to operate at a level below conscious decision-making. Ambassador Kext sat back in his observation chair, his scales showing patterns that Lyra had learned to recognize as reluctant acceptance. This changes the strategic calculation significantly, he admitted. If enhanced humans literally cannot engage in aggressive warfare, then their existence represents defensive capability rather than offensive threat.
Which brings us to the next phase of treaty negotiations, Admiral Chen said.
Now that we've established the parameters of enhanced human capabilities, we can discuss their integration into coalition defense planning. Over the following hours, as diplomats and military officials worked out the details of humanity's new acknowledged role in galactic security, Lyra found herself alone with Marcus in their quarters aboard the flagship. "So," she said, settling into a chair across from where he sat reading reports on a datapad. "6 months ago, I married a mid-level diplomat. Today I find out I'm married to a living weapon who can disable dreadnoughts but can't hurt a civilian even to save his own life. I have to admit, this wasn't what I expected from political marriage." Marcus set down his datapad and looked at her with the kind of attention she'd learned to treasure, the complete focus of someone whose enhanced awareness meant he never missed a detail of her expressions or tone. "What did you expect?" he asked. "Trade agreements, boring diplomatic receptions. Maybe some awkward attempts at building a working relationship with someone I'd been assigned to marry for strategic reasons. And instead?" Lyra considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had included combat against hostile alien fleets, negotiations that would reshape galactic civilization, and the gradual discovery that the man she'd married for duty had become someone she loved for reasons that had nothing to do with politics. "Instead, I got a marriage to someone who turns into a force of nature when protecting innocent people, but who still brings me coffee in the morning the way I like it," she said. "Someone who can interface with Starship systems using his enhanced nervous system, but who also leaves little notes in my diplomatic briefings when he thinks I need encouragement." Marcus's smile was soft and entirely human. The enhancement modifications don't change personality. They just amplify the protective instincts that were already there. "Is that why you volunteered for enhancement in the first place?" Lyra asked. "Partly," Marcus replied, "but mostly it was because I understood what Admiral Chen meant about hoping for the best while preparing for the worst. I hoped humanity would find a place in galactic civilization through peaceful cooperation. But I was prepared to make sure that if cooperation failed, our species would survive anyway. And now?" Marcus reached over and took her hand, his fingers tracing the quantum-entangled particles that still marked them as bonded under coalition law. "Now I think we found something better than either cooperation or survival," he said. "We found partnership, real partnership, between species who understand each other's capabilities and limitations." Lyra squeezed his hand, feeling the slight warmth that indicated his enhancements were active at a low level, constantly monitoring their environment for threats, constantly ready to protect the people he cared about. "There's still going to be opposition," she pointed out. "Not every species is going to accept enhanced humans as coalition peacekeepers. The hegemony has already announced that they consider the treaty amendments to be unacceptable." "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Marcus replied. "But we'll deal with it the way we've been handling everything else together, with full disclosure of capabilities and limitations, and with absolute commitment to protecting civilian populations regardless of their species or political affiliation." A chime from the quarters communication system interrupted them, announcing an incoming priority message from Earth. Marcus accepted the transmission, and Admiral Chen's image appeared on the display screen. "Marcus, Lyra," she said without preamble, "we've just received confirmation that the hegemony is moving forward with their planned response to the treaty amendments. They're forming a coalition of species opposed to enhanced human integration into coalition defense forces." "How serious is the opposition?" Lyra asked. "Serious enough that they're calling it the Purity Alliance," Admiral Chen replied grimly. "Their stated goal is the removal of all enhanced humans from positions of authority within coalition space." Marcus and Lyra exchanged a look that carried the weight of everything they'd learned about each other over the past 6 months. "I suppose," Lyra said finally, "that honeymoons don't last forever." "No," Marcus agreed, his hand moving unconsciously to the pendant at his throat, as his enhanced senses began processing threat assessments and defensive preparations. "But marriages do." As Admiral Chen's transmission ended and they began preparing for what would undoubtedly be the next phase of humanity's integration into galactic civilization, Lyra reflected on how much had changed since that diplomatic ceremony 6 months ago. She'd married Marcus Chen for duty, believing she was participating in a routine political alliance between species with compatible economic interests. Instead, she'd discovered that duty could become love, that protection could become partnership, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons or enhanced abilities, but with the simple determination to build something better than what had existed before. The galaxy was about to test that determination. But then again, as Marcus had demonstrated during the hegemony attack, some challenges only made the defenders stronger, and Lyra had learnt that when you were married to a battle deity who brought you coffee in the morning and left encouraging notes in your diplomatic briefings, you could face almost any challenge the universe had to offer, even one that threatened the future of galactic civilization itself. The Purity Alliance was about to discover what humanity meant when they said they were prepared for the worst. But this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. This time, they'd have allies who understood exactly what they were protecting, and why it was worth protecting. This time, duty and love were fighting on the same side. And that, Lyra thought as she watched Marcus begin his preparations for humanity's next war, was going to make all the difference in the galaxy.